All right, we're going to get into the wiring harness. So, as I showed you earlier, there are these two, the large actual components for the wiring harness itself, and the smaller of the two is for the driver's side, and the more, the thicker and the one with more terminals is for the passenger side. And it's pretty easy to tell. What we're going to do for wiring this is both of the tail ends of the wiring harness come down the B pillar, and they terminate underneath the driver's seat. So for the driver's side, you'll start by unwinding it with the large terminal under seat side first, where it all comes together, and the sort of octopus arms are going to reach out into the back of the van. And what we'll do is start where the first split is. Right here. So right where it splits into three different wires, we'll take this shrink-wrapped junction, and we're going to zip tie it right up here to the factory harness, right above the B pillar. Now, when we do that, we know that we have enough length to make it down and underneath the seat and into the fuse block. And we also know that each of our sort of octopus arms are going to reach where the terminals need to come out of the panels. Moving back, we're going to take the shortest one. And if you read it, it's going to say USB 3. It's also going to have some blue marks on it. So the blue marks are all the USB and 12-volt outlets. So that's the first one to run into the vehicle. And what I like to do is go over the top of the OEM wiring harness, and if you reach down here, you'll find this little slot that will allow it to pass down this side of the window, and ultimately it terminates in this first bay. So it'll come out right down here, and we'll be able to put our terminal ends on. So then we'll take the rest of the harness, and this is where you can just kind of choose which corrugation in the steel roof that you'd like to pass it through. So the next one is the ones that are wrapped in yellow. Those are for the lights, and we'll pass them through the corrugation to the other side. The next ones we'll pass through are also blue, and these are for the USBs and 12 volts that will continue down the van, and we'll pass those through as well. If you still have some of the OEM wires, they have these little clips in them, so they'll be in your way potentially, and you can go ahead and pop those down so that you can pass the wire through. So with this one, we'll start with the longest one, pass it through, and then the shorter of the two will pass through, and then continue to do that through the ribs. After the second rib, the shorter blue USB will pass down over the top of the OEM wiring harness, down, and on the rear side, the aft side of this window, it'll pass through that same sort of channel that's on the front, and it'll come out in bay 3 at the bottom. The longer of them, of the two, will continue past the zero line. Once you get past the zero line, you can tuck it right behind the OEM wire and run it along the bottom of the channel. You'll be able to pass it. You'll be able to pass it along this channel all the way to the aft side of the van and drop it down into the very last bay. So here, we just want to make sure we have enough slack for it to kind of ride up into the to the ceiling. All right, so don't run it so it's so tight that it's giving tension and pulling down like this. A little slack, make sure that you can continue to push it up. And of course, you still have room on the end that plugs into the fuse block. So that can give you a little bit of space too if you do accidentally run it too tight. And as we continue down, I'm just going to continue to pass the light as well through. And again, we have a clip that's in the way. This clip you can remove before, but there is room to get around it on the furthest end, on the clip that's closest to the wall. So, in the third bay, there are two things that happen. The blue USB will pass behind the OEM wire and go down the aft side of the window, like I mentioned earlier. Again, making sure that you have enough slack so that you can stick it to the ceiling. We'll actually use the hush mat, roll the hush mat over the top of this wiring harness here, and it'll help fasten it to the ceiling and keep it from flopping. On the end that has the yellow, which is also labeled lights, we will take the shorter of the two. One of them is a little longer than the other. We'll take the shorter of the two and leave it in this bay. The longer of the two, we will continue on to the next bay, past the 0 line, and that one terminates just behind there. So these can now just both be hanging here, and they will plug into the light panels. So with the shorter USB going down the aft side of the window, you're left with just the long cable for the very, very aft bay USB plug-in. So we'll just, again, once you're past the 0 line, you can slip it down, again, behind the OEM wire. And now you can just pass it through these bays that are up on top. And as you move to the very back, you'll find that there is also a small little hole that will give you access to drop it down to the bottom.
Okay, Okay, so here we are just finishing out the wiring harness in a 170, and wanted to make a quick note here. So your light wiring harness, we showed you running the two ends here on either end of the 0 line, and you'll also have another one that runs toward the back of the van. And so it'll run along the back of the van, and then it'll come over here in bay 7. This one's actually a little bit further back because this customer has a custom setup, but we just wanted to let you know that when you see the rest of your harness, go ahead and run it back here and come over into this bay, and that's where your last light panel will connect.
Just so that it's more, it's just in place for right where the USB and 12 volt outlets will be. All right, so that's all we have to do for the driver's side, and we'll move over to the passenger side. All right, so with the passenger side harness, again, it's the heavier one. It's got more terminals on it, so that's how you know. What we're going to do is, it's pretty much the same process in that we're going to unroll the side that is fully connected first, and as we unroll it, we're going to get to our first major split. Now you'll notice that one of the wires is going backwards and the rest of them are going forward. Okay, so that's the split, and there is a hole right up here in this corner that we're going to run a zip tie through, and we're going to hold this split up to the van with the zip tie right into that corner. Okay, now one of the wires, the one that's going backwards, we will take it and pass it backwards through the top of this B pillar. And when we get into the hush mat, this is one of the places where I like to put a little bit of hush mat because there's a piece of sheet metal, an edge right there. So I usually just wrap that edge with a piece of hush mat just to make it a little bit softer on the harness. The protective loom helps a lot, but it's just sort of an extra precaution. So you run it backwards through that, and that actually runs down the B pillar underneath the driver's seat, and we'll show you how to put it under the driver's seat in a moment. So once that one's heading back, this we can now sort of push it up into the ceiling and really cinch that zip tie down. Actually flip that around this way. There we go. So the main part of the harness, or the part that's all one loom, we will then zip tie to the first rib, and you can zip tie it to either side. You know, you can pass all of this octopus arms from the back if you run it on the front side, but it's not necessary. Everything fits with accessing it from the front side. So again, we'll just use our zip ties to fasten this harness to the front of this first rib. Once you get to the driver's side of the B pillar, go ahead and use a zip tie to fasten this whole little junction together. And I wrap it around the driver's side harness as well as the OEM harness. All right, so now both of the harnesses are on the driver's side. That's where you will start using these special zip ties that have a little sort of Christmas tree on the end of it. And those are meant to go into these OEM holes down the B-pillar. You can also zip tie it to the inside of the OEM harness, but to give it a little bit of extra support, I also use these. You're going to pass it down the forward side of the seatbelt here, but you're not going to put it too far forward so that it gets in the way of your trim, because your trim still's got to come around and come down. There is a channel right here where the OEM harness is. So honestly, with this one, I'll probably just put it on either side of the OEM harness. So you slip it right in there, and cinch it tight. So it's nice and tight right there. And again, you just kind of work your way down, zip tying it. I like to zip tie it where the OEM fasteners are, and then when we get to the bottom, we'll show you how to get it underneath the seat base. That's new. Can you see me here? Mm-hmm. All right, so one thing to keep in mind is you'll have these vertical slots. That's where the B-pillar attaches to the van. So as you can see down here on the bottom, just make sure that you're not pushing the wires so they get in the way of that as well. So you want clean access to that when you put your B-pillar on. Also, right here it'll get a little bit tight, but you just sort of stack them, stack our two harness wires along the inside edge of this B-pillar harness. All right, so once you've secured the harness that goes down the B-pillar to the seats, you can come back and it's the same exact process as on the other side. There's just a few other terminals. We have this very short branch that comes off of this one loom. These, if they're white, they go to the fans. So if you only have one fan, you're only going to be using one of these terminals, so you'll cap the ends with those white caps that I showed you. And depending on if you're going to mount it in the front or the aft part of the vehicle, that will determine on which ones you end up capping. So we'll start with the fans. I like to take the fans and run them down the second corrugation here, only because they'll be closer to where the fans are. So with the long one, we'll obviously continue down past the zero line towards the aft side of the van. And as soon as we get to the junction for the shorter split here, we'll just guide it through. This split lives in the second bay, so it doesn't go any further. And again, make sure that you give yourself enough slack for this to be fastened to the ceiling. So the next one we can put down is purple. The purple and the orange ends are for the auxiliaries. So this auxiliary will end up just past the 0 line, and it'll terminate up in the upper box there, and I just put a roll around it and zip tie it and cap it. Also, they're color coded on the other side, so you know if you're not going to use it, just don't even plug it into the fuse block. You can let it just float there. You know that there's no juice going to that wire. Some people use this for a USB, and they'll pop it out over towards the aft side of the vehicle, so it's up higher. Some people wire lights into it, and some people wire electric harness or awnings into it. So I pass that through the one that's closest to the side of the van, because it'll go straight over to the wall. All right, so once those are through, we'll grab the third one. The third branch is the USB and 12 volt branch, and there are two of them. One of them will come down just aft of the 0 line and terminate at the first bay that's right behind the 0 line on the passenger side of the vehicle, and the other one will go all the way to the end of the vehicle like it did on the driver's side. These don't necessarily matter which side you put them in, but there is room for it to go on the furthest most corrugation that's closest to the wall, where we just ran the auxiliary. And generally it's not a problem. If you are having a real problem passing them through here, you can tape the two ends together temporarily while you pass it through if you're having real trouble getting it through the ribs, but usually it's just a matter of twisting it so they're sort of bent up towards the ceiling, and then they'll stay within that corrugation and pass through. Once it gets into the second bay, they'll split, but you'll still continue to pass at least both of them through the next rib to get past the 0 line. Okay, so we just got past the 0 line with all 4 of our ends. The shortest one here, marked purple. I'm just gonna wrap this up. This van is not getting anything connected to this auxiliary harness yet, but it's ready for the future. If somebody intends to put some electricity over here, then it's all set. So I'm just gonna zip tie it in a little loop, tuck it behind here, and there's another wire chase that'll go up here. It'll hold it back, so you don't need to necessarily worry about it flopping around for right now. The next one we're going to take is the fan line, and you'll just run it to the bay where you want to set your fan. So this one is getting the fan in the 7th bay, so we'll continue to go through this corrugation. Now, there is, on the 5th rib, both of the corrugations in the ceiling terminate there. So this one's a little bit of a trick to get it to go under and come back up on the other side. I suggest making sure that it's bent. The wires, the ends of the wires are bent just a little bit up so that they will continue to want to travel along the ceiling. If you have a pre 2019, there may be some butyl in the way too, so you just kind of have to futz with it a little bit and you can get it through there. also, if you're not going too far back, you may have room to come over to the side and come back out to one of the further bays. In the 144, you certainly will. In the 170, depending on which bay you're going to go to, if you're going to go to the furthest most bay back, you will be terminating a little bit short. However, the fans have a very long tail, and so it will reach over to the edge and you can make that connection. So if this is just an impossibility for you and you're having a lot of trouble, you can go ahead and run it back right here, right after the zero line, or right after the right after the zero line, because this will be the problem rib. You just run it back, run it across the top, and then come out at the bay that you want. If you do that, please wrap the top of these wires with, or of these bays with the hush mat, or take the hush mat and fasten it, the wire against the wall of the vehicle, so that it's not resting on those sharp edges. All right, so this is the bay we're going to terminate this fan in. We'll move back. We've got the USBs. Again, there's one that's shorter and one that's longer. Take the shorter one and you will pass it down the back side of the sliding door, and it will come out at the bottom. This is really like 4 feet too long. And this one is 4 feet too short. So with the last tail, drop it down just like you did on the driver's side and pass it along the bottom of these bays. This side is short. Really short. Oh, right, never mind. But it won't work for the extended. And the other side's too long. Again, you're coming out at the bottom here, and I'm passing it over the top of that flange that returns to the wall on the top of the bay. And pulling it out so that we can put our terminals on the end. So with that, you've run your wiring harness. The only thing left is the auxiliary that goes under the seat. So we'll turn around and we'll show you how that goes in. When we put the auxiliary in for under the seat, there's more options for attachments. Again, we're going to use the zip ties that have the little ends on them. I usually like to start them a little first, just so it's easier. And I snap the first one up into this corner here. Give it a little bit of slack so it's not pulling tension over that little rib that I was talking about up there that we're going to hush mat later. And just work your way down. Once you get to the bottom here, there's really no need to even remove the whole seat unless you're actually doing an install under here for whatever accessory you're using. So what I do is remove this foam piece. Now, a lot of people will rip this foam piece or destroy it, but they are critical. If there's no cover here, the inside just fills with filth. So you want to keep these intact. And the easiest way to do that with the seat still on is release the center and then pull, by pushing up in the center, pull the sides down because they're tucked underneath each of these rails. So I actually pulled both sides down and I kind of fold it a little bit in on itself and pull it out to the side. And that way you're not ripping or tearing or destroying that foam cover. Once you've done that, there is one OEM wire that is passing underneath this seat, and you'll be able to see it pretty easily. And it's coming out along here, along the bottom of the B pillar. All right, so what I like to do is give this a little bit of a banana curve. All right, and you're going to pass it underneath the step shroud here, and with it sort of curving inward and upward. If you look inside here, you can see that it'll sort of naturally want to curve into that open space. That allows you to grab it right here and slip it through, and now it's ready for your accessory to plug into. Once you're done with that, you can turn this thing back around, give it a little bend so it slips under the sides, and get it back into position. And that way you don't have to remove the whole seat if you're not actually going to be using the auxiliary under here, and it'll be there for future wiring.